Hi there, everyone. Just a few technical points. So for those in the beautiful Guidewire Dublin office, you're very, very welcome. If you could all please just take a moment to make sure your phones are on silent. And if you're going to be leaving the room, if you could just go over this left-hand side, please, that'd be fantastic. For those online, if you will notice that you've been put on mute for the moment. We're going to have a Q&A later. So please do get engaged. You can see the QR code being shared on your screen at the moment. And we'll unmute your mics later on. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jhan.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Jhan Doughty. I'm Vice President and Global Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Everest. Welcome to Dive In Ireland. So I'm thrilled today to be in the beautiful headquarters of Guidewire and to welcome all of you, our viewing audience, and all of you in our live room today. Please join me in welcoming Christina Colby from Guidewire.
Thank you all so much for being here in person as well as virtually. I'm Guidewire's Chief Customer Officer, and I'm thrilled to be the sponsor for this. Is our first year of participation in Dive In. And we're absolutely excited to be able to be involved in this community and all of the fantastic events that are happening worldwide for this festival over the course of this week and for, I know, a long time to come. So this being now the second day of the festival's 10th year is really quite remarkable. And we're extremely excited to be able to be part of this community, as well as to welcome you to this session in particular, which is about diverse perspectives of mental health in the workplace. And that has never been more timely for insurance than it is today. At Guidewire, we truly believe that diversity is a superpower. From my perspective, I've always been focused on the fact that diversity of thought allows us to bring so many more creative and innovative solutions to the problems that we face. And when we really take the time to discover each other's non-obvious similarities, as well as to truly celebrate our differences, that's when diversity becomes truly the superpower that we know that it can be, both in terms of what we do in our businesses today, and really instilling long-term differentiation and sustainability in the way that it is truly at the forefront of this festival's theme. So I'm particularly excited for the role that Guidewire is going to play at Dive In this year and for hopefully many, many years and even decades to come. And I think the role for us, with truly a bias towards technology in the insurance industry, allows us to really take a look at this topic of mental health in the workplace in a very different way. There's so much stress that is included with the notion of what generative AI, as a completely different domain and set of capabilities, will bring to the roles that not only employees at insurance companies will have, but also across the insurance landscape, whether that be relative to the personal lines that we support, the individuals who work for commercial lines customers, whether we think about excess and specialty and the changing nature of risk, or into the reinsurance space as well. And of course, all of the groups that serve those entities as well across agency and brokerage. So we're thrilled to be able to be part of this. I cannot wait to hear from the panelists. And so, Jhan, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Christina. So a couple of things for all of you. There are some global sponsors who we really want to acknowledge who supported our event today. So Access Capital, Everest, Guidewire, Kennedy's, Liberty Mutual, SCORE, and WTW. We thank you for embracing the session today. Now, we're going to talk about diverse perspectives in mental health. This centers the conversation on mental health and wellness in the workplace. Now, we all know this already. We spend almost half of our time at work. So to be able to bring diverse perspectives here is really critical. Now, here in Ireland, there's the Mental Health Treatment Act and the National Framework for Recovery and Mental Health. that provides mental health services for individuals. That's critical that Ireland is in the center and doing this amazing work connected to mental health. And as a clinical mental health therapist myself by training, who so happened to join the insurance industry, this topic is really important to me. Now, the steering committee and I do recognize that mental health can be viewed by a couple of different perspectives. So today, we have panelists who come from a range of different backgrounds who are going to share their experiences with you. Now, there will be personal perspectives that our panelists will share. So, a little disclaimer for you, and all of my legal friends will probably like this, that the views and sentiments expressed by our panelists today are their own. They are not reflective of any entity that they belong to or the companies that they represent. This is their voices. So we wanted to make sure that disclaimer was out there. Okay, let's dive in, Ireland. So what we're going to do is I want to have our panelists own their voices and introduce themselves to you. So I'd like to begin by turning it over first to Aisling. Ashley, good morning. Would you introduce yourself, please, to our dive-in audience?
Hi, Jhan. Yes, my name's Aisling O'Doherty. I'm the Senior HR Manager. I look after the EMEA region for Kennedy's Law.
Awesome. Let's turn it over to Emily.
Hello, I'm Emily Redding. I work at WTW within our Marine Department of Insurance, but I come here today with my mental health hat on because I'm tri-lead of our mental health effort within the GB network here at WTW.
Awesome. Robert, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Dublin. I'm Robert Jarvis Jr. I lead our DEI program at Guidewire. I am a DEI strategist, and earlier in my career, I also studied marriage counseling and family therapy as a graduate student. So bringing in that perspective as well.
Wonderful. Aoife, good morning.
Good morning, Jhan. Hi, everyone. I'm Aoife McKenna. I'm with the ANH Claims Manager at Axis. And my perspective today is as an employee. I'm heavily involved in the DEI space and within our ERG network, and I'm delighted to be part of this panel.
Wonderful. And Dara.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Dara Walsh. I'm a senior actuary for Liberty Specialty Markets in the UK and MENA team. And my perspective today is from being a mental health first aider and part of our health and wellbeing network.
Okay, awesome. Thank you all and welcome, panelists. I want to begin by talking about some of the challenges and barriers. Now, mind you, there's a range of different aspects related to mental health, but I wanted to bring Robert into the conversation first from Guidewire. Robert, could you share a little bit about some of the challenges and barriers within our industry for mental health wellness? All right,
Yes,
then we'll go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's several issues as it relates to mental health in our industry. And some of them we need to take a sense of ownership for. But the first I would say is I have a background as a person who was a life insurance producer. And the fact that the products that we sell often relate to someone's worst day gives us access to other people's trauma. And that in itself has an impact that we all need to consider. And that's why self-care is so important. Secondly, what I would also say is ease of access to care providers is an opportunity that I think we in the insurance industry have to be looking at how we can solve for ensuring that the insureds have access to providers, therapists, et cetera, that can serve their mental health needs, as well as making sure that our mental health providers can get paid properly and operate their businesses. And that's an inherent challenge within the insurance space, is making sure that we're part of that solution. And then the last thing I would say, which is particularly of interest and importance to Ireland, is when it comes to ease of access to care. Ireland ranked, a study done by the European Commission, it ranked as the country in the EU that had the most difficulty getting access to care. So that's something that I think is especially important here in Ireland.
Thank you, Robert. Now, Aoife, I wanted to have a little bit of a conversation this morning about families and how companies can support families. Could you talk a little bit about how adaptive do companies need to be to support colleagues and families in their mental health wellness journey?
Sure, thanks, Jhan. Well, I suppose I said at the outset, the caveat on my for me on this panel today is that I'm by far not a mental health expert, but I do come from the perspective of a colleague that is acutely aware of the wider context and impact of mental health generally, but particularly in our workplace. I appreciate that for some, there's the occasional stress, feelings of having a bad day, but everyday things are not necessarily mental health, but equally, awareness of is absolutely fundamental. So I can only speak, I'm with Access 15 years, so I can only speak about my experience over the last while. And I suppose the focus on mental health has always been there. But with the advent of COVID, there was a much more focused approach. There was support and awareness of mental health during this time, which included not just your colleague, but your family and how to deal with things outside of work. And that was exceptional. And what that did was escalated a deeper management of colleagues and their families' mental health, much more than, let's say, being assigned or directed to an employee assistance program. It was much more than that. We were having discussions, there were information sessions, we were being truly supportive of one another via our network of ERGs, our employee resource groups. And that has been a fundamental outreach for colleagues. And that has been led by the colleagues and certainly with the strategic vision of the DEI Council here at Access. So that was obviously with our, the kind of COVID, post-COVID, and that wasn't left on the shelf. That is always being developed. And what that has done, that evolved even further our commitment and awareness, and it could not be stronger. And indeed, in April this year, Access joined the Project Minds, Healthy Minds Coalition. This is a community of forward-thinking companies who recognise that investing in workplace health programs will improve productivity, reduce turnover, and ultimately lead to better financial performance. So companies like ours, like Access, we are making sure we don't just tick a box when it comes to mental health. We have fostered many support structures, communities within our groups, and partnerships where mental health is at the forefront of wider strategic decision making. And colleagues are supported in a number of ways, and there's a true sense of colleagues who care not just about ourselves, but about something that may be going on within their families or within their children and their children's lives. So I particularly think of our parent and caregivers ERG, where there's a lot of discussion, let's say, not necessarily about the colleagues' mental health, but something that their children or people that they care for may be going through, and just support and directing them in the right way. And with our partnership with Project Healthy Minds, just to kind of throw out some of the statistics, just to give a realization of the impact of this. Now, this is predominantly US research, but around 65 million Americans will experience a mental illness in this year alone. Now, just compare that to cancer, which is 15.7, heart disease at 30.3 million. That is by far the biggest. And then also between 1990 and 2013, the number of people reportedly suffering from depression and or anxiety has increased by 50%. So from 416 to 615 million. Like, those figures are absolutely staggering. And when we try to commute that into the cost, depression and anxiety will account for 1 trillion in lost productivity every year. So there are reasons why, as people, as humans, as colleagues, that we really do need to address and support anyone with mental health issues. So I think what we're doing here in Access, and I've no doubt that my panelists have all strategies within their organization, but it is truly something that is being actively managed, that we're making sure that we're supporting colleagues as and when they need.
Thank you. And you bring up such a good point, in the sense that when we all come to work, we don't leave a part of ourselves at home. Like, we're all complete humans. So the resources and support that we need to give to each other once we arrive in the workplace is so critical. So thank you for that. Now, the insurance industry has had quite a bit of a journey when it comes to mental health and the ways that we've responded to that. I want to turn the conversation over to you, Emily, to talk a little bit about the insurance industry and how have we evolved during the course of your career and how we respond to mental health issues.
I think it's been a really positive change over recent years, which I'm very happy to see. There's still a taboo in talking around mental health and well-being, most definitely, but particularly COVID, as Aoife, you mentioned just now, I think that it gave quite a shift in mindset with a lot of people. A lot of people realised that mental well-being is not necessarily the same as dipping all the way into mental ill health, but everybody can have dips in mental well-being, and it made people empathise a lot more with those who are perhaps struggling a little more. So the shift that I've seen most definitely since COVID is people are more willing to talk. We have a network here of mental health first aiders, and I'm part of that network. And I noticed the change in conversations that I had pre-COVID to post-COVID and in the years since. Prior, I was getting a lot less people come to me. And now I get a lot more people come to me earlier on within their mental well-being journey. Perhaps they're feeling just a little bit not quite themselves, as opposed to dipping all the way further and then needing support. People come to us at all sorts of different levels, but I'm finding it really positive that people come to me and say, I'm just not feeling myself and I want to do something about it. What can we do? How can we help? And there's lots of bits and pieces within our company, the same as if you mentioned in yours, that we can do to support those individuals. And I wasn't getting those same conversations prior to COVID and a few years back from that. So I definitely say that's a really positive change over recent years.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned the concept of a mental health first aider, and I know we have individuals who are listening in from multiple countries, and also our audience here, so they may not all be familiar with the term. So, Dara, I want you to kind of help us out a little bit. Could you talk a little bit, Dara, about the mental health first aider and not only what that concept is, but how do you do that work in your particular organization?
Yeah, of course. So a mental health first aider is someone that's completed the mental health first aid course. So similar to someone that will have done like a physical first aid course, there is a course that you go on to become certified. And what those people are then sort of qualified to do are to help someone that may be, experiencing a mental health crisis or developing a mental health problem. They are trained to both try to identify someone that may be going through, a crisis or have an issue, but also to respond to the warning signs and provide that initial support. And signpost where sort of if it needs it, where sort of more further professional support may be needed. So whether that's through something the company offers, through an AEP, an EAP, or whether it may be through, the healthcare provider or external resources that could also be able to support. So it offers employees the space to actually come to someone in the office. So as you say, so people can bring their whole selves to work. Obviously, work is such a key part of people's lives. So having someone there that you can actually reach out to in the office is extremely important. But the aim of the mental health first aider isn't necessarily to, fix the issue. We don't give advice. What we do is we are the sort of first stage in that process, so we can listen. And often the conversations that you have, all they need is someone to actually listen to the issue, and they can often, the person can feel better after having that conversation. But if it does need any sort of further attention, then you can signpost where they can get that support, whether that's support through something that's offered by the company, or as I say, something that might, require external support. Because we're not trained counsellors, that's not the idea. It's to be someone to listen and to sort of help guide where that support can be given. It can also be really important. So obviously, any conversations that you have with anybody whenever they come up to you as a mental health first aider, it's all obviously confidential. That conversation doesn't go any further than two people in the room. But what you can get from it, we have around about 80 mental health first aiders within our company now, and we often have, whether it be monthly or quarterly, meet as a group of mental health first aiders to discuss like common themes that may be coming up. So while you're not disclosing the particular conversations that are happening, you can sort of get a feeling for, are there similar issues across all of the company that actually the company then needs to address? So we can take that information back to our health and wellbeing network, and we can basically escalate if any issues come up. And where that happened quite a bit was as we were coming out of COVID and we were sort of the idea of returning to work. People were extremely anxious about coming back to the office, and that could just be because they hadn't been in the office for nearly 2 years. They may have had family members at home that they were looking after, that by going back to the office could mean that they couldn't go and visit their elderly parents or children potentially that needed to still shield. So having those conversations with the employees and giving them that space to be able to discuss it, while then also being able to feed it back to the company to say, like, this is a genuine issue. We need to sort of tailor what our back to work looks like, because this is sort of what the people on the ground are thinking about. The mental health first aiders offered that space for them to talk, but then being able to feed back to the company, we need to think about it this way. And that did shape sort of the thought process of, okay, maybe some people won't be able to return back, maybe it has to be phased, and you sort of have to understand what your employees need in that space. And we've had a sort of continued push. I think at the very start, we maybe had 4 mental health first aiders. We're now up to 80. The idea being that we want to make sure within all different departments, we have someone that is mental health first aid trained, because often it can be easier to speak to somebody that you're familiar with, so that someone in your team or someone you recognize, but also it could be you'd actually rather speak to someone you've never met before, because it might be easier to talk to them in that way. But by getting sort of the breadth of people across the whole company, it sort of offers that potential familiarity whenever they try to have those conversations. So that's been a real big push to try and make sure we basically get as many people certified as possible.
Thank you, Dara. Very, very, very important role in any organization. So thanks for explaining that. Now, in many of our organizations, the HR department or human resources department is very central in supporting mental health and wellness. So Aisling, I wanted to have you join our conversation this morning or evening. Could you talk a little bit about the types of accommodations and support that you've seen HR professionals provide in the area of mental health?
Sure, Jhan. Yeah, and you're right. As a HR professional, it's quite unbelievable actually what you do come across in the workplace. Like, I've come across such a variety of mental health issues, from ADHD to depression and anxiety to PTSD and schizophrenia. Actually, I was in a previous life, I was a registered psychologist, so I'm at a small advantage there, where that's trained me to be able to recognize symptoms and I guess deal with them a little bit more readily. But I think coming from that background, I think one of the most important things that we can do as an accommodation for our employees is to ensure that our managers are trained in recognizing mental health symptoms and not being afraid to deal with them. I think that can be one of the biggest problems that we face in all organizations, is because they're tricky situations to deal with, and managers can be quite tentative about facing up to them. But having that training and understanding of symptoms and not being afraid to have a conversation, I think, is the best way we can assist our employees. We've made other accommodations depending on the circumstances. Of course, it depends on what the mental health situation that you're dealing with is, but there are different like keyboards and headsets and things that you can offer. Like, for example, with somebody with ADHD might benefit from that type of equipment. There's like software that you can use. There are also situations where a gradual return to the workplace is effective. Back in my previous life, I used to deal with a lot of people who were in bank holdups. It sounds quite dramatic, but they were suffering from PTSD and they were petrified to come back to the workplace for obvious reasons. So gradually just exposing them to like the back office and gradually getting them back into the workplace was one way that we dealt with that situation. But equally, somebody who's been off work with mental health condition for a long time will feel very tired when they come back to work, and gradually returning them to the workplace is one of the accommodations that you can use to assist them.
Thank you. What I like the most in what you shared is that there are all kinds of resources that individuals can use and seek out, and I think that's great. We talked about mental health in a variety of different ways. If you've heard already the terms, we've said mental health, we've talked about wellness, we've kind of gone back and forth. I'm sure for many of you who are in the audience, you're probably have your own understanding or concept of what mental health is for you. But I'd like for our panelists to kind of talk a little bit about mental health and what that definition is for them, because I think sometimes we just go through things as beautiful humans and not really realizing that it is a wellness factor for us. It is a mental health aspect for us. And I thought it would be helpful, and so did the committee, to kind of talk a little bit about that. So I'll pitch this to any of the panelists. And before the panelists answer, I just want to do a quick reminder that we did at the opening have a Slido QR code. So if any of you in the audience have questions, you can start thinking about those as our panelists talk a little bit about their definitions of mental health. So I'll toss it to any of the panelists. As you reflect on the term, what does mental health mean for you? Maybe we'll start with Robert.
Thanks, Jan. So from my perspective, I think we are a combination of a physical, mental, and spiritual, however you look at that. And to me, when you're talking about mental health, it's the anchor point of all the rest of that and how that works. Because if you're not sound mentally, it affects you physically and spiritually as well. And I think it's very important for us to take that into account as we look at holistic health.
Great. Anyone else?
Yeah, just to add on to that, like I think it is such an important part of you, as you say, Robert. Like it sort of connects everything to how you're feeling, how it's gonna impact you in every aspect of your life. And I think just like your physical health that needs to be looked after, I think people are often very good at whether it's eating well, sleeping well, going to the gym or whatever they do sort of to look after the physical health, but the mental health can often sort of be left behind. And I think just like your physical health, you need to understand what impacts your mental health, both positively and negatively. I think that's sort of how you can understand how to nurture it better. Like when you get sick, you need to understand sort of what made you sick, what caused it, so that you can get better. And it's the same idea with your mental health. You need to know sort of what are the drivers within your life that are positively or negatively impacting your mental health, so that you can sort of better look after it. And so then if you're in a situation that's going to sort of deteriorate your mental health, what you need to do to either change that situation or remove yourself from that situation to sort of get back into a more positive space.
I love that. It's almost like if we have a physical health plan, right, for our exercising and our physical health, what's your mental plan as well? So I love that. Any other panelists want to comment on that question?
I'll happily speak from a very personal and practical perspective, if you like, Jhan.
Sure, go for it.
As somebody that lives with an anxiety disorder myself, from an anxiety perspective, mental health and well-being to me is emotional well-being. It's a calm mind. It's finding moments of peace, and it's being able to process the emotions of the day in a way that is healthy and within perspective. So from a perspective of anxiety, it's things like taking the time to make sure I get the right sleep. It's making sure I have things I know that are going to engage my mind and give me peace. And for me, that's arty things, crafty things. When I come home, taking 10, 15 minutes just to potter around my garden doing bits and pieces gives me real peace of mind. And of course, my dog. I love to walk my dog, but also give him a big cuddle. That always makes you feel better. That's what mental health and mental well-being looks like for me from an anxiety perspective. And I do strongly believe any number of different mental health conditions that you could experience, or even just general mental well-being that dips slightly but isn't mental ill health, each have their own perspectives. But there are definitely some core pieces, exactly as Dara mentioned. It's things like exercise, it's things like sleep, it's things like making time for you and doing the things that fill your bucket, is the phrase, isn't it? Or fill your cup and make you feel content and happy, to make you feel well. They differ for everybody. It's so important to find what matters for you, and that will look different depending on how your mental health is as an individual.
So there's some resources or programs, and we've talked a little bit about this in some of the other answers. Emily, I'll start with you again, and then we can also toss it to Aoife and Ashing. What are some resources or programs that you found to be most helpful in supporting you or colleagues with your mental health or wellness journey?
So two particularly important ones for us as a company, speaking of WCW UK specifically, are same as Dara, mental health first aiders. We have 140 or so at the moment. We've had that program running for quite a number of years. I think that's so important. It's so important for visibility, that people know that there is somewhere to come to, that people care and they want to listen, for all the reasons Dara explained, that people come and they utilise the services. We listen, we signpost, but we care. That's what's most important. But then we also have various programs within the company where we can offer things like exercise programs, like nutritionist advice, like lifestyle coaching, as well as counselling, should that be necessary, within mental health support. We recognise that mental well-being is connected to so many different things, and we look for a holistic approach. And I think those sort of two core parts of what we do here are most important to us. But we also have a mental health network that reaches out in different ways at different points of the year, provides resources, support, and is forever trying to increase awareness of talking about how you're feeling and knowing where to come to if you don't have anyone in particular that you feel you want to talk to. But yeah, all of those things.
Aoife, anything you want to add?
No, much the same as what Emily mentioned. Access supports and is very active in that space. But one thing that I will add is our ERG network. So our employee resource groups that we have are small communities, and we can branch off if there's a discussion piece that comes up in a meeting and you identify something that needs to be addressed. And that is just a community of people, colleagues that have maybe the same issue going on, that may or may not be causing generalized stress, or someone, it could be really feeding into someone's mental unwellness. So it's being able to identify, and I'm really interested in what Aisling was saying about having to train our managers to be able to identify certain symptoms or triggers or flags. And I actually think that responsibility is on all colleagues. So I think that there are colleagues that are so vested to do that. But when I think about half our time spent in work, I think of outside of work. I have 4 sisters, good group of friends. There's a WhatsApp group if someone is concerned about someone. If you meet someone, downtown or out, you say, is she okay? Or is he okay? Have you heard from them? So that same sense of involvement, identifiers, support, because I think Dara mentioned, initially that as first aiders, mental health first aiders, sometimes when someone just opens up about their problem, almost half of that is lifted, before that immediate anxiety is lifted. So what we do in that space matters to the person that needs it, and to ignore that or to not have the awareness is probably really, is the critical thing. And that's certainly something within Access, that we always have the awareness. We have any amount of tools and supports and communities. We're partnered with Project Healthy Minds, this is something that would evolve to keep addressing this very issue. You know, I was listening to, or I watched something on the news there during the week, and it was to do with Alzheimer's. And what they were thinking of is putting a band, you know, for people that have Alzheimer's that can, you know, have information, and, you know, that there's something there that could support that person with that condition. And then we think of someone who breaks their legs. You can see it, you can treat it. We really have to think about how we support people with mental health when it's not something visible, and it's something most likely very, very private. So it's engaging that part of your mind as a human, as a colleague, and as a friend. And once the awareness piece is there, we're on the start of the journey. We are also engaged as panelists and participants within this festival, but it's making sure that we reach much more people so that this conversation, you know, is not something that has stigma attached or that isn't talked about. So that's my roundabout way of answering that, Jhan.
Yeah, thank you. And you're right. I love the fact that Dive In has really approached inclusion and diversity and really centered mental health and wellness. So thank you. Anything you'd like to add, Ashley?
I think I was going to talk about all the resources that Kennedy's offer actually, but they're very similar. I think a lot of companies offer are becoming more aware of mental health in the workplace these days, and they offer a variety of support mechanisms. I suppose the only thing I would add that hasn't been said is the fact that Gen Z, you know, they're becoming more prevalent in the workforce. I think there's expected to be about a third of our workforce are made up of Gen Zs by next year. So they are a different generation, and they're very open to speaking about mental health, and they have very different expectations in terms of mental health as well. They expect employers to provide solutions for them, you know, treatment and work-life balance. So I think companies just need to be alive to that fact that it's a new generation of people coming through the workplace nowadays, and companies are going to have to adapt to that.
Yes. Anything you'd like to add, Dara?
I was just going to say, just on that point as well, something I suppose that can be quite useful in our health and wellbeing network tries to do are putting out surveys to the company to sort of get a gauge of, it can be sort of whether it's something very specific that we're looking an answer for that we can try and sort of help employees, or just a gauge of like what are they interested in, what's going on with them, to then, you know, see if we're having events or sort of what needs to be targeted, and, you know, what resources would be most helpful for the employees. So like going out and actually asking the employees what they want, you know, they'll often tell you. So it can be quite a, you know, it's a blunt tool, but it can be quite useful.
Yes, you're right. Now, we shared a little bit earlier about some legal and in some cases even ethical issues that may come up when talking about mental health and wellness. I wanted to kind of turn this to you, Robert, if you can share a little bit of some of the legal or ethical issues that you think we may need to pay attention to as we now work with colleagues or talk with others about mental health.
I think one of my favorite ones, which is often clear and obvious, is we live in a very heavily social media influenced world today. And with that, we have lots of people that are willing to offer their experience and guidance as, let's say, coaches at best. And so there's a lot of people out there, they may have even millions of followers that are operating in a capacity of being able to give mental health advice and guidance. I think one of the things that we have to be careful though, and this is the first part of my studies in graduate school, was about ethics, was about how do you make sure that you are taking the right role in this relationship with your client. And in today's day and age, without those checks and balances, without that level of scrutiny that people are actually holding themselves accountable to before they get on a microphone and give you some mental health guidance, you may actually lead people in the wrong direction. And I don't think that's something that we should take lightly. So I always say consider the source as you're evaluating who you're listening to. There can be some goodness in what people have to offer, but I think we do have to be concerned about that aspect as we have more and more people stepping out into technology, weighing in on mental health.
Oh, there we go. I was saying we're in a very social media driven time. Any questions that are coming from online?
Yeah, our audience are very, very in sync with our panelists, which is absolutely fantastic. So actually, most of the questions are being answered as we go along, which is brilliant. One question has come through about the silent epidemic of loneliness and how we deal with that in the workplace.
Panelist, how do you deal with loneliness in the workplace? Good question from the audience.
I'll go ahead and take that one.
Go for
So
it.
from my perspective, and I learned this a long time ago, early in my career, one of my early mentors told me that one of the most important things you can do in all that you do at work is put your relationship before the issues. So take those moments as you're getting into business with folks, as you're talking to folks, check in with them. Take 2 or 3 minutes out of your meeting agenda just to really see how people are doing. And I think the more that we take those opportunities to build connection across lines of difference, or even just with people that we're working with, that actually gives us a sense of community around the work that we do. And I think it enriches our overall employee experience. So I think that's one aspect of how we could address loneliness.
And Jhan, just from my side, I think I just mentioned it in the answer to the last question, just making sure you have your blinkers off. Yes, we're busy. Yes, we're doing our jobs, but you do need to take your blinkers off and think, have I heard from that person? Or if you see them when you're in the office, if there's anything that is, as a human and as a colleague, you're thinking they're very quiet or haven't seen them at all, and check in on them. And I think that responsibility is true, not just as colleagues, that would be same for neighbours, parts of your family, your friends, so it's, again, the awareness piece is so big. Yes, we're all in busy jobs, we're in busy lives, but you do have to stop and think, have you heard from someone? It's so critically important. And loneliness is, can be so detrimental to a lot of people. And it was obviously very true after COVID. So we need to learn the lessons from that, to socialize more, to think about others more, to be that empathetic person.
And I think the more inclusive we can make the workplace, and the easier it is for people to, be their true selves, bring all of their person to work, the easier it is to have those conversations, or for someone to, speak up and say, I need help, or for managers to try and identify, from what Ashley was saying, giving them the tool set to be able to, one, identify it, but feel, strong enough that they have the support of the company to actually, try and act on whatever the issue is. So I think it's extremely important that we foster that environment. And obviously through events like this, it's clearly something that employees and employers care about, and it can be very difficult, but I think it's worthwhile to try and strive to make it as open and inclusive as possible. And I think that will sort of help a lot of the issues that we see.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, so for smaller companies who maybe don't have the resources, what one thing should they focus on first in their mental health journey?
So from my side, all I'd say is awareness. There's a couple of good things out of COVID, but the light being shone on mental health as a result of COVID was fantastic. And we cannot let the momentum go on that. So for smaller organizations or smaller teams, focus, just what Dara was saying, just focus on, have we got time for us to do a team lunch? Is there something that we can do offsite? Can we focus one day where we do something as an organization that supports a mental health charity? Things like that, where you have that opportunity to reflect, whether it's for 1 hour, 40 minutes, whatever the session may be. And I think smaller and larger organizations can do that, and do that effectively. It might not necessarily help everyone involved, but they're guaranteed there will be one person in there that either needs help themselves, or they're concerned about someone, family and friends, that will trigger their awareness and how they're able to manage that. So So making sure that that momentum is not lost. The statistics I was mentioning within a question a few minutes ago around the impact and the progression of the mental health crisis is not reducing. It is not reducing. And as Aisling said, you know, with the next generation of workers that are coming in, this isn't going to go away. So with the spotlight that is on mental health, we need to fully understand it, keep the awareness piece there, and do things together. Not all the time, but even once or twice a year, whatever the case may be, but to focus on that.
Can I add to that as well, that I completely agree with everything you've said there, but I'd also say lead from the front. Make sure speaking about mental health and well-being is not taboo. If you are the one who works every hour under the sun and never takes a moment to look after yourself, your colleagues will follow. If you say, no, I'm scheduling half an hour in here because I need this break, I'm going out for a walk on my lunch break, or whatever it is capacity you've got within your company. I know it can be tough, but lead from the front. Don't be afraid to speak about mental wellness yourself, and then the conversation is more likely to keep flowing.
Yeah, I think whenever you see that from your leadership, it can have a really big impact. Whether that's
Yeah.
opening up about their own mental health issues potentially that they've had, it just takes that barrier away completely. It can be a really, really strong impact.
It gives permission, doesn't it, for everyone else to speak about it, or say, no, I want to protect that half an hour in the middle of the day, whatever it looks like for you, to do something for my well-being, because that's important. It gives you permission.
At Kennedy's, we've actually recently just had an initiative where we've asked our senior leaders to be open about situations where they've felt vulnerable, so that employees feel that they can speak openly as well. So yeah, that's an example of leading from the front. I completely agree with you. It's so important.
I agree with that as well. I think we're all kind of resolving on that. This most scalable approach is leadership, right? It doesn't take any extra funding to step out as a leader and make sure that you are supportive of mental health. I just want to take a moment to recognize the leadership we have at Guidewire. A little bit of a shameless plug, but we've seen some examples where most senior executives make an opportunity for folks that are having these mental health challenges to step away from assignments and work. And I think that in itself, it's not just on paper, it's in practice, doing that and making sure that people know about that. It's okay to take care of yourself. I think it's a powerful way to support employees, and doing things like having a half day off for mental health once a month, or being sensitive to situations that are happening for employees is all important. But the last thing I will say on the leadership that I don't think we've touched a lot on here, and I'll just pin it with this, is it also comes down to how we manage and lead. If you are creating and maintaining environments where you're prioritizing your employees' mental health in how you lead and how you interact with them, that's also part of it. And I think that's something that you can do at a company that has 5 employees or 500,000. So.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're nearing towards the end of our time, and I wanted our viewing audience to just have a takeaway that they can use to help them with their own mental health and wellness journey. I'll share mine. I have a sticky note that I have on my laptop, and it's also on my wall. And all it says is the word grace. Grace. That's it. And whenever I look at it, it allows me to give myself a little bit of a pause, because sometimes we can be a little tough on ourselves. So seeing that word grace causes me to take a step back, breathe a little bit. But it also causes me to not react so quickly when things don't happen the way that I think that they should. The actions of others. Give people a little bit of grace. So it's a really, really good kind of tip. So grab that sticky note and do one. So I wanted to have our panelists. What's a final kind of tip on mental health wellness that you could share with our audience? And I'll start with Aoife.
I always think of the absolute worst outcome of mental illness, which is something like suicide. And I remember years and years and years ago, it happened within a family friend. And my twin said to me, we were obviously harrowing, it was horrendous. And she said it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And that always resonated with me. And Jan, you said breathe. Whenever we're met with the stress, the panic, or the sense of being overwhelmed, literally breathe. And what I mean by that is being able to inhale and exhale, trying to see who's your support network. How do you manage what is happening now? Or if it happens to a friend or to a colleague, what do we do in that moment to best help them? And sometimes it's just being a listening ear. And sometimes, when we speak about ethical or legal things, we would say, do you need to speak with someone professionally? Because obviously you're not coming as a mental health professional. So when I think of that, I do think of breathe. And I mean breathe to take in, what can I do now? How can I help that person? Do I need help with trying to help that person? So I think that is literally what I think of. Grace, I love that. But for me, it is literally breathe. How can I do this? Breathe in, breathe out. How can we manage this?
Love it. Dara, one piece of advice, what would you do?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to what was said at the start. It's learning what those drivers of what adds to your positive mental health and what sort of adds to your negative mental health. And for me, if I start to get into a situation where I'm feeling overwhelmed or starting to feel anxious, it's knowing what drivers I can do to whether that's going for a walk, going to a gym class, going for a run, that I know will help me sort of get out of that situation and get back into a space where I've got sort of better wellness. Because as you said, it is temporary, and temporary can be for a long time, obviously, but it's knowing what's going to impact you, how it's going to impact you. And it's that just looking sort of internally and thinking, okay, how did I get into this situation of bad mental health at the minute? And what historically have I been able to do to get back to a better place? And you just have to take that time to sort of reflect on yourself, so that whenever those situations arise, one, that is temporary, and you've maybe been there before and you can get out of it, and sort of follow those steps and have that plan in place that you can sort of get back into a better space.
Love it. Ashley.
Well, again, with my HR hat on, I suppose I'm speaking to the managers in the room, but my main takeaway is just to become aware of mental health and be able to recognize symptoms. Don't put poor attendance and underperformance down to laziness and bad conduct. There could be an underlying reason for those behaviors, and you need to make yourself aware of what those may be and be able to have a conversation with your employee, and not shy away from those conversations.
Awesome. Emily.
I would say do your best not to bottle things up. If it's something small, you've just lost perspective, talk to someone if you can. If that's not your cup of tea, journaling is really helpful. There are so many people out there that want to listen and want to care, whether that be mental health first aiders if your organisation has them, or there's loads of different charities that want to just help you feel better in yourself. So whichever way works for you, journaling, talking, going for a walk with the dog, whatever works for you, try your best not to bottle it up, because it's better out than bottling up inside.
I love that. Robert.
I want to start with just a quick mental catchphrase is really work on your mental health, or your mental health is going to work on you. And I know we talked a little bit about suicide, and I'll just briefly say, whether you're talking the US or Ireland, I think 70 to 80% of all suicides are done by men. And speaking from a male perspective, last year, a very powerful song came out called "To Be a Man." Millions of people watched this song, and they started to understand some of the burdens that men carry. And what I would flip that to is that we all, whether you're male, female, or identify differently, we all carry those mental burdens. And one of the things that I think we can take ownership of is being available to other people. really doing the check-ins that we talked about and making sure that we are embracing that aspect. And lastly, what I would say is, as you assess your own mental health and treat it like your physical health, you got to do some of the work, and you got to understand what the burden looks like and find healthy ways to lighten that burden. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And with that, everyone, please join me in thanking our panelists for a great conversation today. And again, we want to thank warmly the team here at Guidewire for your amazing hospitality and for hosting this in-person session. And for our global sponsors, again, my awesome company, Everest, Kennedy's, WTW, Liberty, and Capital, Access Capital. We really want to thank all of you for your sponsorship, and hope that the rest of you enjoy Dive In. This is it for Dive In Ireland, and we thank you for joining us today.